Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we will learn how to create an age calculator using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Here you can see the age calculator takes a date as an input, and when we click on the calculate button, it calculates the age in years, months and in days. Let us try this with other dates as well. Now let me change the year. Maybe I'll choose a leap year, February 29th of Feb, and here you go. It has again calculated the age accurately. Let me go to past to 1952, choose a date, and hit the calculate button. Let me do this for one more date, which is far in the future. Let us see what happens then, and hit the calculate button. So there's an alert saying not born yet. Let's begin with the HTML code. It consists of a container div that holds two sections, the inputs and the outputs. Inside the container, we have the input wrapper div. This div contains an input element of type date with an ID date input. This input field allows the user to select a date using the date picker. Next, we have a button with the text calculate. The ID for this button is calculate age button. After this, we have an output wrapper div which contains three nested divs. Each nested div represents an output element: year, month, and days. Let's begin with years. For each output, we have a span element with ID years, months, and days, and a corresponding text value set to dash initially. These spans will be dynamically updated with the age that is calculated using JavaScript. Below each span, there is a P element that specifies the unit of measurement for specific output, such as years, months, or days. Once we complete the HTML code, let us go to CSS. First, the universal selector sets the padding and margin to 0 and applies box sizing property, which includes padding and border in the element's total width and height calculations. The box sizing is set to border box, while the font family is set to Poppins, which is a very popular sans serif font. We set the background color of the body to a vibrant purple. Next, the container class defines the styles for the main container of the age calculator. It has a minimum width of 40% or 28.12 em, whichever is the minimum. We use absolute positioning and use the transforms and top and left property to center the container horizontally and vertically on the page. Next, we select all the elements inside the container and set their border and outline to none. This removes any default borders and outlines. We next style the input wrapper. For this, we set the background color to white and padding to 1.87 em at the top and bottom and 1.5 em on right and left. The border radius is set to 0.5 em to give it a round and sleek look. We use box shadow to make the box or the input wrapper pop out a bit. Let me increase the width to 60% maybe. This looks fine. And now applying the box shadow. As you can see, adding box shadow adds a subtle elevation effect. Now adding a margin bottom to 3.12 em. We then set the display to grid. The grid template column property is used to create two column layout, with the first column taking up 9 fractions of the available space and the second column taking up to 3 fractions. The gap property adds a spacing of 1 em between the grids. The styles for input and the button elements within the input wrapper have been simplified. The font weight is set to 500 and border radius is set to 0.31 em, which is approximately equal to 5 pixels. Input element now has a padding of 1.2 em on the top and bottom and 1.25 em on right and left. The font size has been adjusted to 0.87 em. For the button element, we set the color to white. Next, we set the background color to purple, which is same as the background color of our body. For input, we set the background color to a light gray shade and color to a dark gray shade. The output wrapper class, which contains the age output values, remains the same as before, with a width of 100% and a flexible box layout that justifies the content space between. The output wrapper div selector defines the styles for each output div. They have a height and width of 6.25 em and a white background color. The border radius is set to 0.31 em and box shadow is added to create an elevated effect. Next, we set the color to a dark gray shade and set the display to grid. We place the items in the center. The padding is set to 1.25 em at the top and bottom. The span element within the each output has a font size of 1.87 em and font weight of 500. Next, we target the P element, which displays the unit of measurement and has a font size of 0.87 em and a color set to 707070, which is a dark gray color. I'm sorry, it's a light gray color and the font weight is set to 400. Next, we include the JavaScript code within the HTML code using the script tag. We will start with the age calculate function, which is the main function responsible for calculating the age. Before that, let us add an event listener to the button. We add a click event listener to the button. So now when the user clicks on the button, the age calculate function is called. The age calculate function begins by creating a date object called today to get the current date and time. Next, we retrieve the user's input date from HTML element with the ID date input and create another date object called input date with that value. Then we extract the day, month and year from the input date using the getDate method, getMonth method and the getFullYear method respectively. These values are stored in the birth details object. Following that, we get the current year, month and date using the same methods on the today object. Now, we need to check if the input date is in the future. We call isTheFutureDate function passing in the birth details object and the current year, month and date. This function determines if the birth year is greater than the current year or if the birth month is greater than the current month. If the birth date is also greater than the current date within the same month, it means that the input date is in the future. We implement the following function for this. If the input date is indeed in the future, an alert message is displayed using the alert function informing the user that they haven't been born yet. The display result function is then called with placeholder values dash for days, months and years to clear the output. Finally, the function returns ending the calculation. On the other hand, if the input date is valid and not in the future, we proceed with the calculating the age. We call the calculate age function, passing in the birth details object and the current year, month and date. This function performs the necessary calculations to determine the age in years, months and days. The function determines if the birth year is greater than the current year or if the birth month is greater than the current month. If the birth date is also greater than the current date within the same month, it means the input date is in future. Now let us implement this in terms of programming. We next define the calculate age function which takes the birth details, current year, current month and current day as the arguments. The function performs the necessary calculations to determine the age in years, months and days. Inside the calculate age function, we begin by subtracting the birth year from the current year and storing the result in years variable. We also declare variables for months and days. To calculate the months, we check if the current month is less than the birth month. If it is, we decrement the age by 1 year and calculate the difference between 12 and the birth month plus the current month. This handles the case where the birth month is ahead of the current month within the same year. For the days calculation, we check if the current date is less than the birth date. If it is, we decrement the age by 1 month and calculate the number of days in the previous month using the get days in the month function. We subtract the difference between the birth date and the current date from the days in the previous month. This handles cases where the birth date is ahead of the current date within the same month. Now, if the current date is greater than or equal to the birth date, we simply subtract the birth date from the current date to get the number of days. The calculate age function returns an object containing the calculated years, months, and days. Now, moving on, we have another function. This function is called get days in the month, which takes the month and years as parameter. This function calculates the number of days in the given month. It first checks if the year is a leap year by verifying if it is divisible by 4, but not divisible by 100 unless it is divisible by 400. If it is a leap year, February has 29 days, otherwise, it has 28 days. The function then returns the number of days based on the provided month and year. Finally, we have the display result function. This function takes the calculated birth date, that is B date, B month, and B year as arguments. It retrieves the corresponding HTML elements by their IDs and updates their text content property with the calculated values, displaying the age on the page. That's it for the code. Now let us check if the code is working by inputting some date, and let us click on the calculate button, and yes, the code works properly. I hope you enjoyed the video. If yes, please hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more such content. Thank you.